Welcome to The Daily. I'm Niall Paterson, and today we return to US politics, a favourite topic of mine, something I really never get tired of discussing, in fact. But on this occasion, even I'm experiencing a bit of déjà vu.
When I ran for president 4 years ago, I said we're in a battle for the soul of America, and we still are. The question we're facing is whether in the years ahead we have more freedom or less freedom, more rights or fewer. I know what I want the answer to be, and I think you do too. This is not a time to be complacent. That's why I'm running for re-election. Because I know America.
That, of course, President Joe Biden announcing that he wants to have a second term in the Oval Office. Against a backdrop of some pretty poor approval ratings, Biden isn't necessarily the first choice of every Democratic strategist, but some impressive results in the midterms mean there really isn't another clear candidate. Yet he is already the oldest president in US history. And if he gains that second term, he will be, get this, 86 when he finally leaves office and presumably has a sit down for a while. The expectation is that he will be facing the guy he beat in 2020, the second oldest man to ever sit in the Oval Office, Donald Trump.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
At a sprightly 76, Trump beat Biden to the punch, announcing his candidacy in November last year. Since then, however, he has become the first former or current president to be charged with a crime. 34 felony counts, in fact, of falsifying business records and conspiracy, to which he has pleaded not guilty. Yet who would bet against him facing off against Biden next November? In a very real sense, here we go again. Later, I'll be speaking to two strategists from opposite sides of the American political divide. But first, our US correspondent, Mark Stone.
Months and months ago now, my colleague and I, Emily Purser, our bureau chief here, she and I had a bet. She said, of course he'll run again. And I said, I'm not so sure he will, actually. There was this idea that he'd be a one-term president and then he'd hand on to someone else. And I assumed that those closest to him, his family, his wife, the First Lady Jill Biden, might just counsel him that actually, you know what, Pop, you know what, Joe, you've had a great first run. You've had a great 4 years, as they would see it. Let's find a really good successor and hand on to them. He's not getting any younger, let's be honest. That's the core concern. It's the attack point from the right, and it is a genuine worry from the left and the centre left. Obviously, I was wrong, because Joe Biden is a man who has lived and breathed politics for so many decades, one of the youngest senators on Capitol Hill. He's always wanted to be president. And why on earth would he give it up after just one term? And that was my colleague's cold logic, the cold logic of politics.
The starting point from which Joe Biden launches his bid for a second term, it ain't great, is it? I mean, you look at the personal approval ratings, they're not fantastic.
He's kind of below the waterline, as they say, below 50%, way below, I mean, in the high 30s in terms of his approval rating. And then this really interesting poll done at the weekend by NBC News, our colleagues there released a poll which suggested that only 1 in 4 Americans would like to see Joe Biden run again. And that obviously includes Democrats, includes people who voted for him last time. They just don't want him back. Incidentally, the same poll suggests that pretty much the same number, 30% or so, want Donald Trump to run. So we've got these two elderly men, and I think that is a legitimate point to bring up their age, who are going to rerun 2020. It's all going to happen again, all very divided, but fascinating stuff.
Presumably, though, there is a calculation in the White House that looks at what went on in 2020 and thinks, well, do you know what? Why not?
That's the central calculation, I think, in the White House. It's kind of simple but risky logic. And it is that Trump was beaten by Biden 3.5 years ago. Therefore, Biden can do it again.
Surely on the part of the American electorate, the first place they look when electing a president, particularly electing one who is, choosing someone who is the incumbent, is on the successes or otherwise of the first term. And in terms of his achievements, what are they?
I was at an event in Washington that was effectively the collective trades unions of builders across the United States. So blue-collar workers, as they're known, whether they be bricklayers, whether they be plumbers, anything to do with infrastructure and building. Thousands of them gathered into the Washington Hilton. And the guest of honor was Joe Biden.
To have the strongest economy in the world, we need the best infrastructure in the world.
There were multiple standing ovations for him. This was his natural habitat. And these are the people who will vote for him next time because of one of his key achievements, passing what's known as the infrastructure bill, spending millions and millions and millions of dollars rebuilding America. These are the people who are traditionally Democrats who in 2016 decided they'd give Trump a shot. And so he is trying to win them back.
I'm happy that he's running again. It's better than that orange thing.
But a lot of these old Rust Belt towns, once steel towns, but no longer, they are still really suffering. So it's not straightforward. It's not clear cut. So infrastructure and the economy, inflation aside, is doing pretty well under Biden. But the pain of inflation is so extreme that a lot of people won't feel any successes that the economy has got. I mean, unemployment is at record lows, but it's so expensive to buy a pint of milk at $7-8 that people will not necessarily appreciate any of the sort of core strengths of the American economy. I think Democrats, Neil, would see that over the course of the past 3.5 years, Biden has done what he wanted to do, which is sort of restore the soul of the nation. Steady the tiller after such chaos of the Trump years, as the Democrats would see it. In his campaign video, he's almost kind of projecting himself as a father figure, a father of the nation. That's the sort of image he's going for, calm. The voice was low. And I just felt that he was trying to juxtapose calm, steady, authority, experience, 80. Yes, it's old, but it also means he's massively experienced. He's juxtaposing that against the chaos of Donald Trump.
Even in the achievements that you have listed, it is questionable whether or not the American electorate is noticing them. I saw a recent poll in the Washington Post, 62% think that Joe Biden has accomplished not very much or little or nothing. So there is a problem, certainly, in terms of communications. But if you want an example of a failure of Joe Biden, surely we go straight back to the first day that he entered the White House and he said that he would unite America. I mean, that clearly hasn't happened.
People don't believe broadly that he has been a particularly successful president. But it goes back to a phrase that Biden has used so many times. Don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. I mean, that is really hardly an inspirational. He's basically saying, I'm not as bad as the other one. It's not a great assessment of where America is, that no one younger or more dynamic with the same, political agenda, whether it be left or right, has emerged. But I think the judgment that they will make in the Trump White House is that Biden-Harris beat Trump last time. Trump's going to be the contender. They're going to need to put that team forward because no one else has emerged to try to beat him again. And don't forget, I mean, look back at history, and I think it was 95, Clinton was going for his second term. He was not the choice of many for the Democratic candidate for a second term. Even, he obviously wanted a second term, but a lot of people didn't want him. And yet, as that year turned into the election year, they all fell behind him and they voted for him.
I thought the whole plan was Joe Biden comes in, has his term, gets his time in the Oval Office, and then Kamala Harris would go for it the next time around. I mean, clearly that's not going to happen. She's clearly not up to muster.
She has been a real disappointment for many. She hasn't punched through in a way that people imagined she would. There was such excitement over the first female vice president, the first black vice president. I mean, it was an amazing moment. There have also, over the course of the past few years, been suggestions that she and Joe Biden haven't always seen eye to eye, that they haven't got on. They've never been stood up.
The old grey, wrinkly elephant in the room of Joe Biden's age, when he is up against someone in Donald Trump, or we're assuming he's up against someone in Donald Trump, who himself is no spring chicken.
Donald Trump, sometimes he seems more agile. The debate between Biden and Trump, even when it happens, this time around, will be electrifying. And, it'll be maybe pretty cringing at times, because Look, honestly, I've been looking at some of Biden's speeches that he gave 4 or 5 years ago and comparing them with speeches he's given recently. He has aged. He is less fluent. That's not a jibe. It's an observation. He is older, 4 years older, and that shows.
During Donald Trump's time in the White House, Washington Post, they kept a record of every lie that had been told. Fox News, however, during the Biden presidency, are keeping a record of every time he makes a gaffe, that he makes a misstatement, that he calls someone by the wrong name. Does that not at least show that in the minds of a significant chunk of the American electorate, Joe Biden's age is not just a passing concern, it is an active concern for a lot of people?
Yeah, and it's got him into trouble. Not his age, but his gaffes. Whether the two are related is debatable. So there have been moments where his lack of fluency could cause genuine problems. And obviously for Republicans, that's a central attack point. And so it should be.
People out there need help.
But why didn't you do it over the last
wait,
25 years?
Because you weren't president. Because you weren't president screwing things up.
You were a senator. And
You're
by
the
way,
worst
you were a
president
vice-
America has ever had.
Hey,
Come
Joe,
on.
let me
It would be difficult to imagine a more acrimonious election than Trump versus Biden back in 2020. And as for the idea that come 2024, both men will be older and wiser, well, I suppose 1 out of 2 isn't bad. But how best to fight that campaign, to keep the base on side, to bring back those who've left the fold, to win over the floating voters across the country? Time, I think, to get the advice of a couple of political strategists. And let's start with the Democrats, shall we? Sidney Blumenthal was senior advisor to both Bill and Hillary Clinton. And it is fair to say, isn't it, Sidney, that not everyone wanted Biden to run again.
A lot of Democrats before his announcement were hesitant and wished him not to run. On the other hand, if he did not run, he would create an open primary and all the factions of the party would scramble against each other, creating openings for the other side. You know, he's been very good on his feet and he's the one who's behind his policies. There's no question about it. He's not a figurehead. He's in charge.
In terms of his policy portfolio, in terms of the first term, however, whilst there have been achievements, and they're recognisable even from this side of the Atlantic, do you feel that the American public recognise them as Joe Biden's achievements? Recent polling suggests, at least in terms of his personal popularity, is not desperately strong. And another Washington Post survey that I saw not that long ago as well, suggesting that actually in terms of what the general public think that he has done, well, you know, over 60% think he's done not very much.
That's a misperception. He has done an extraordinary amount, particularly in his first 2 years before the Republicans were elected in control of the House of Representatives. There have been enormous legislative achievements that he's led. On the other hand, the public is not always aware of them. Many of the things that he has done have included infrastructure building in so-called red states, that is Republican-led states, and people are not only unaware of it, but they don't want to be aware of it.
And I wonder how you sell Joe Biden to Democrats who perhaps after the amount of time that he has served in office were perhaps looking for a change.
Well, it used to be said about the parties that the Republicans fell in line and the Democrats fell in love. So the Democrats are not in love, but they're falling in line. The Republicans are in love, but they're not falling in line. So there's been a kind of a reversal of character type here of the parties. So everyone in the party understands that we're facing an existential threat from the Republican Party and that its likely nominee is Donald Trump. So the party is lining up behind Biden, whether or not they're in love with him or not. And they understand that this is not an ordinary election and that they must support Biden for not only the party, but for the fate of the country.
To what extent do you think that things like the indictment, the Stormy Daniels allegations, and indeed what happened during the Capitol Hill insurrection, let's call it what it was, I mean, to what extent these can then be weaponized against Donald Trump at the general election? Not at this point, of course, but when we get into the campaign proper.
All of these will play out over months of time, and he will be facing a host of legal difficulties. At the same time, this plays out politically. The more he's prosecuted, the more his base feels he's persecuted and that these are politically motivated, whatever the source, whatever the action. And so they cling to him, and the bond becomes stronger and stronger. He's now 27 points among Republicans, higher than Ron DeSantis. And for Joe Biden, the way this will play out is that there are several key swing states, and in the swing states, there are several key swing districts, largely suburban districts of moderate voters. They're moved by, among other things, the abortion issue and the Supreme Court decision heavily, but they're also moved by Donald Trump, and they are repulsed by him.
Sidney, is the presidential election in 2024, is it Joe Biden's to lose?
Of course, it's Joe Biden's to lose. He holds the office. I think on both sides, there's a feeling, and particularly on the Democratic side, that this is an existential election about the future of not only American democracy, but of the Western alliance and the state of our national security throughout the world. So everything is at stake in this election.
Thank you, Sidney. So, what of the grand old party? Amy Tarkanian is a Republican strategist and commentator. Amy, great to have you back on the podcast. So let's flip things a little and start with Donald Trump. I mean, is it an inevitability that he will be standing in the elections next year?
That's the way that it's actually headed as we speak. Now, of course, in the world of politics, as you know, things change very quickly, but it does seem that that is going to be the case, unfortunately.
So how do the Republicans exploit Joe Biden's age without appearing ageist, without essentially trying to capitalize on a number rather than on, the policy achievements?
I think it would be very simple. I mean, you can touch on the economy, for example. Everybody, doesn't matter what your party affiliation is, feels that, they are struggling financially at some level. The price of gas, the price of food, it has gone up exponentially. And I think that's an area where Republicans really could jump on and tout. Now, I think that where we're going to find ourselves in trouble are going to be the social issues. And that's where you saw President Biden in his announcement for his reelection campaign really focused on heavily. And that was dealing with anything with LGBTQ issues, reproductive rights, and healthcare. And so Republicans are going to have to do an excellent job on their messaging and getting ahead of those issues, because that's actually what helped the Democrats succeed in the midterm.
That's exactly the point I was going to make, because, Joe Biden can look at those results and say, look, I've got a proven track record here. Look at the midterms and look at 2020.
Right. And he doesn't have to touch on the economy. He doesn't have to touch on inflation or the border, because those are the topics that actually put a lot of the voters, let's say abortion, for example, a lot of people who are pro-choice or pro-life, with no middle ground, no compromise in that area, those are one issue voters. So you need to make sure that your message is strong and that you put enough money behind it in order to counter those type of voters and be able to bring into the fold the independents and nonpartisans. And that's where I think President Trump's really going to struggle.
On the Democrat side, clearly there is no clear alternative to Joe Biden. I think that in part is one of the reasons why he's announced that he will be standing. But on the Republican side, of course, you do have Ron DeSantis. I mean, I'm wondering from a Republican strategist point of view, who offers the best opportunity to get Republicans back into the White House? Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis?
At one time, I thought Ron DeSantis. And now I question that, though, because of a couple of moves that he recently made in his home state of Florida. And those two issues that I think that will come back to haunt him once he does decide to announce his run for presidency are going to be on gun control and on abortion.
What would be the consequences of a second Joe Biden term, do you think?
Well, I think we're going to continue to do a downward spiral domestically and internationally. There's no more fear or major concern over what goes on across the oceans. You've got North Korea out of control once again. You've got Russia, constantly hounding the Ukraine. And then you've got here now at home, you've got people that are coming across the border not just by the hundreds, but by the thousands. I hate to say this, but I feel that it's going to be even more doom and gloom, but I guess at least we know what we're dealing with. I just think that people overall, President Biden was not a fabulous option. He was in the right place at the right time because people were exhausted and very angry with Donald Trump, especially after the January 6th debacle. And so people are still going to vote against him, I think, in the end. Will it be a loss as great as it was this last time? It might be a little bit closer. I don't know that answer, but I still think he's going to lose.
Thanks, Amy. Back to Mark Stone for a final thought on Biden versus Trump round 2. Mark, look, given what happened last time, particularly those riots, and there were riots on Capitol Hill, are you actually looking forward to covering the election next year?
It's going to be incredible, but it's going to be divisive. It's going to be quite depressing. A lot of American cities are in a very sad state, and the people then replicate that sadness. They are a bit desperate for something new, something different. And I think that will translate into divisive politics, divisive debates, and probably a pretty divisive result in November 24.
My thanks to Amy Tarkanian, Sidney Blumenthal, Mark Stone, and of course to you for listening to the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson. This edition was produced by Annie Joyce with Alex Eden. Our editor is Philly Beaumont.